Hi and welcome to the Tour Talk Pro Golf Podcast with me, your host Grahame. In this week's episode, we'll break down everything that happened at the DP World Tour Championships and what it means for a bunch of different players. We'll talk about the Butterfield Bermuda Championship, which was an absolute spectacle this week in the PGA Tour Fall Season, and again what that means for players heading into the final event of the fall season. We'll also cover some news that's been happening in the golfing world, and also we'll then look at the Annika event on the LPGA Tour and obviously what that means as they head into their final event in the race for the CME Globe next week. Right, let's head first to the DP World Tour Championships, as it was likely the biggest event on professional golf this week. And first of all, let's talk about Rory McIlroy walking to another race to Dubai on the DP World Tour. Basically, this is now his 7th win, his 7th Order of Merit victory, which now moves him past Severiano Ballesteros and only now 1 Order of Merit behind Colin Montgomerie, who is the all-time Order of Merit winner on the European DP World Tour. So obviously heading into the event, although it was possible that Marco Penge and Tyrrell Hatton could win the race to Dubai, it seemed very unlikely and was pretty much Rory McIlroy's to lose. Obviously there wasn't much to talk about in that regard, as he obviously just, won the event. But I think what was really telling and quite interesting was the interview that he had after the event. Obviously it was raised that he'd now surpassed Severiano Ballesteros' 6 Order of Merit titles, and that only Colin Montgomerie stood ahead of him now on 1 more with 8. It was very interesting to see the glint in his eye when obviously he was talking about this, and you could clearly see that there's a significant goal for him to equal Colin Montgomerie's 8 Order of Merits and probably want to surpass that. And again, that would help just cement him as probably the greatest European golfer of all time, both not only generally through his play over his career, but statistically as well. And I think these things are important to Rory McIlroy at this stage in his career. I think the really interesting part of this is the fact that after Rory had won the Masters earlier in the year, it almost appeared like he'd completed golf and he took some time off. Although he was still sort of playing but not playing, it felt like his motivation wasn't there, and for someone now that's basically won everything there is to win, it was almost a case of him going away and trying to look at what it was else that he wanted to achieve to actually complete his career. And I think this Order of Merit on the DP World Tour is something that can keep him focused for a good few years going forward, again in the aim of trying to make himself the greatest European golfer in history. Along with his 7th title, Rory McIlroy picked up a little extra bonus of $2 million for winning the race to Dubai, so no worries about him being able to keep his heating on in Virginia water this winter. So after we move on to the actual tournament that occurred, I think it's pretty clear that after the year that Rory's had, there's possibly potential for us to host a whole show just based on his year. So that could be something to look forward to in the coming weeks. Okay, so the DP World Tour Championship week started off with basically people talking about whether Marco Penge or Tyrrell Hatton could actually catch Rory McIlroy in the race to Dubai. It was obviously interesting that it had got to a stage where we came into the last event and there was still a chance, although the chance was obviously very, very minimal as we could see. So as the week began, basically it was all about, can Rory win his 7th race to Dubai? And obviously it did look like that was likely to happen, as Marco Penge would have had to have had a fantastic event and Rory a poor one to be able to catch up the deficit. And obviously that seemed unlikely to happen, but it was very interesting that it did come down to the final event. Interestingly though, statistically Tyrrell Hatton did still have a chance of winning the event, although it was very slim. But how interesting would that have been if a live golf based player had won the race to Dubai on the DP World Tour? Unfortunately for Marco Penge, he never really got out of the blocks at this event, and he started with rounds of 74 and 70. And by the time it had come to Saturday, Rory, who had started 66-69, was all but crowned Race to Dubai winner. But still a great season for Marco Penge, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. Come Sunday, it looked like Rory McIlroy was going to not only win the Race to Dubai, but also do the double and win the Tour Championships. But Matt Fitzpatrick, who's been rejuvenated in the second half of this year, looked like he might have something to say about that, and he shot 66 on both of the last 2 days and didn't have a bogey on the final day, and he had a 2-shot lead on Rory McIlroy as McIlroy stood on the 18th tee, par 5, needing an eagle to get into a playoff. In typical Rory fashion, he hit a great drive, hit a great shot into the green, and holed another one of those putts for his eagle to take the event into a playoff. As the playoff commenced, obviously the 18th hole at this golf course has this winding stream that runs sort of through the whole of the length of the hole, sort of splits the fairway almost into 2 halves. We'd obviously seen Fitzpatrick hit, and he'd hit it into the left-hand side and into the edge of the rough, and that looked like that was going to limit his ability to get to the green. And then Rory McIlroy stood on the tee looking to take the same line as he'd taken on the 18th hole in normal play, but this time he turned the ball over slightly and it actually headed towards and ended up in the stream in the fairway. It then became quite a messy playoff, to be fair. Obviously Fitzpatrick then had to lay up, and he nearly laid up into the same stream, literally carrying it by just a few feet and leaving himself a shot into the green. Rory McIlroy took a penalty drop, took a fairway wood and sprayed it out to the right hand side into the greenside bunker. Fitzpatrick didn't hit a particularly good approach shot for his third and left himself an awful lot of work to do from the edge of the green. And McIlroy hit a distinctly average bunker shot, basically meaning that he hit 3 poor shots in a row onto the hole. Fitzpatrick got up and down to make his 5, leaving McIlroy with a significant putt to try and make a half to continue the playoff, and of all things he left it short of the hole, right on line. So Matt Fitzpatrick was ultimately the victor, and basically Rory McIlroy just kind of couldn't keep it going on this first playoff hole, and you wouldn't have expected him ever to have made a 6 on that par 5, especially having just come off making an eagle in normal play. With a €2.5 million purse and the points for winning, Matt Fitzpatrick also rose to 3rd in the Race to Dubai and added another $750,000 to his payout, which was obviously nice for a week's work. For a season that started poorly for Fitzpatrick after a distinctly average 2024, as well as splitting from legendary caddy Billy Foster at the end of March, it appeared that this may well be another poor season for Matt Fitzpatrick. However, he seemed to find form around the summertime and on the build-up to the Ryder Cup, and that was enough for Luke Donald to give him a spot on the team, and to be fair, he proved himself good value at this year's Ryder Cup. With the historic Ryder Cup victory under his belt, and also significantly decent run of form towards the end of this year, culminating in this victory at the Tour Championships, perhaps 2026 could be a bright spot for Matt Fitzpatrick, and could maybe lead to him challenging and trying to pick up his 2nd major championship. So not only are there big financial payouts at the DP World Tour Championships, but there's also fantastic opportunity that is afforded to the top 10 DP World Tour players, who then gain a card to play the PGA Tour the following season. So what we'll do now is we'll have a look at the 10 golfers who managed to secure those cards and how I feel about their potential to do well on the PGA Tour next year. So in first place and earning his PGA Tour card was obviously Marco Penge. He's had 3 victories this season and has been fantastic basically all year long. He's full of confidence and he's a big hitter of the golf ball, which should fare well on the PGA Tour. I'm expecting him hopefully to buck this trend of struggling on the PGA Tour from these players that pick up their privileges from their DP World Tour season the previous year, and hopefully he can move on, go to the PGA Tour and make a really good showing and manage to retain his card comfortably. I think he has every chance, and probably better than a number of the players over the recent years who have gained their cards via this route and then struggled once they've got to the PGA Tour. Laurie Canter finished in second. Now this is an interesting one. He was one of the players that went to LIV Golf in the very early stages. Obviously he's never been a PGA Tour player, but he's paid his DP World Tour fines, he's served his suspensions, and he's had a great season on the DP World Tour. So now he gains his card to the PGA Tour. And again, although not a household name, it's very interesting that he's now really the first player who's played LIV Golf who now actually can hold a full-time PGA Tour card. Christopher Wrighton, the Norwegian, has only missed one cut since the end of March, so has played consistently great golf on the DP World Tour. I don't have much more to say for him, but what an opportunity for the 27-year-old to come next season. Adrien Sadier, the French golfer, picked up the 4th spot to secure his place on the PGA Tour, and obviously we'll keep an eye out and see how he gets on during the PGA Tour season. In 5th place, we have Alex Noren, and this is great for the guy and great for golf, and everyone should be exceptionally pleased about this. He was injured for part of the PGA Tour season and fell outside of the top 100 in the FedEx Cup standings. He then came back from his injury and returned back to the DP World Tour and performed amazingly in England, winning the British Masters and shortly after the BMW PGA Championships. I'm sure no one will begrudge this hard-working Swede his PGA Tour card next season, and I don't expect him to struggle anywhere near as much as he did this year, as long as he remains fit and not on the injured list. He's far too good a golfer to not be playing PGA Tour and not getting inside the top 100 players easily and consistently. John Parry filled space number 6. The 38-year-old Englishman had a really solid season with some decent results in bigger events, which is what now allows him to try his luck on the PGA Tour. In 7th place is Hao Tong Li, and my mind goes back to the Open where the charismatic Chinese player fought all the way to the very end to try and win that title. With one win and good finish last week, he secured 7th place and earns his PGA Tour card. Keita Nakajima fills the 8th spot heading to the PGA Tour. He had a very solid season. No victories, but just played really steady golf, which has secured his spot and obviously now allows him to join Hideki Matsuyama at the top table on the PGA Tour. Taking the 9th spot is Rasmus Neergaard Petersen. Now talk about performing when you need it the most. He's tied 3rd at this week's DP Tour Championship, vaulted him into 9th place with rounds of 68, 67, 68 and 68. Another graduate from the 2024 Challenge Tour, the next step in his career awaits on the PGA Tour. And finally, the 10th place goes to Jordan Smith. And again, I don't think anybody will begrudge this guy gaining his PGA Tour card. Last year, he finished 11th in the rankings, so missed out by 1 spot and just a few points. And to add the icing onto the cake, the person who finished in the top 10 was Tom McKibben, who after the season had finished, defected to LIV Golf to join Jon Rahm's team, therefore meaning that he didn't take up his PGA Tour card. Now unfortunately for Jordan Smith, they didn't then move the 11th person into 10th place. They just only took 9 people, which was a shame, and I think Tom McKibben ultimately should have given up his spot probably earlier if he'd known that he was likely to move to LIV Golf, because ultimately that stopped Jordan Smith from having this season on the PGA Tour. Fortunately, he's played solid enough this season and he played really well at the Tour Championships with a great weekend of 64, 69, and that now secures his spot on the PGA Tour. He's a good young golfer and could have potential to do well. So that's the recap of the DP World Tour Championships, the final real event of the DP World Tour season. It created highs, lows and opportunities galore heading into 2026. Some of the players who still wish to play for the rest of the season will now head down to Australia to play some events down there before the end of the calendar year, and then they start planning into 2026. Right, so let's head over to the PGA Tour and the latest full season event, which was the Butterfield Bermuda Championship. What a week of golf and wind that was. Players were fighting for their PGA Tour card while the wind was having a huge part on the event, especially on the final day. Flags were blowing sideways, balls were flying everywhere, and players were creating shots like you only ever see on the links in the UK in the windiest conditions. It was absolutely fantastic TV to watch. As the penultimate event of the PGA Tour full season, it's pretty much now or never to make your move to get into the top 100 places and retain your card, or put that elusive win on the board with all the benefits and securities that brings at the end of it all. And with rounds of 69, 65, 67 and a phenomenal 71 on Sunday under the utmost pressure, and in that wind, Adam Schenk finally picked up his first PGA Tour win, taking home the trophy, 500 FedEx Cup points, $1.08 million and a 2-year exemption on the PGA Tour. The man who spent the week sometimes putting one-handed, sometimes putting two-handed, and quite frankly nearly giving me the yips just watching him, held his nerve and his putting and played some of the most wonderful wind golf shots I've seen in a long time, including punch shots that seemed to go no more than waist high. It was a well-deserved win for the 33-year-old in really, really tough conditions, and he just managed to handle that win better than any of the other players and seemed to just have more answers for the conditions than a lot of his nearest competitors. The main story of the Fall Series, though, is players who are bouncing in and out of the top 100. And the big movers this week in a good way were Max McGreevy, who moved from 100 to 89, likely earning his card. Chandler Phillips's runner-up finish this week jumped him from 139 to 92. And what a week to make that sort of jump in the standings. The final mover was Takumi Kanaya, moving from 120 to 99, so right on the bubble. But a slightly better finish on the last few holes and he would have 100% confirmed his card for next season, but he just couldn't quite finish off his round in that really, really difficult windy conditions. The two biggest players without status on the PGA Tour next year to drop out of the top 100 were Matt Wallace dropping from 97 to 102 and Beau Hossler dropping from 98 to 103. Both now need a huge result at the RSM Classic this week, the final event of the PGA Tour Fall Series, to be able to retain their cards for next year. So the RSM Classic in Sea Island, Georgia is the final stop on the PGA Tour Fall season this year, and it's an event that attracts not only the guys fighting for their PGA Tour cards, but also a handful of the top 50 FedEx Cup players, so it has a slightly stronger field than some events in the Fall Series do. The event plays the first 2 days over 2 courses, the Seaside course being 7,005 yards long and a par 70, and being used every day, and the Plantation course being used on Thursday and Friday is a par 72, 7,060 yards. Last year's winner of the event was Maverick McNeely with a total of 16 under par. Ultimately this week, we're looking for and hoping to find that random player that wins and earns their card in the most miraculous way in the final event, along with a 2-year exemption on the PGA Tour. But also we're going to be closely looking at the guys around this 100 bubble mark, as I mentioned earlier, to either push their way in or risk falling out of the top 100 to the 125 range, and how that impacts their starts and career in 2026. So heading into the news, and there's not really been a lot of information coming out. Live Golf is very quiet, and generally the world of golf isn't producing much noise. But the most interesting piece of news to come out was Justin Thomas's announcement that he'd had a microdiscectomy to remove a part of a partially herniated disc. Now obviously this is a reasonable surgery and means he's now heading into recovery, and he said across his social media platforms that this means he's not yet going to commit to what tournaments he's going to return, but likely he's going to miss the early part of the 2026 season. Obviously, we wish Justin Thomas the best in his recovery, and we hope to see him back fighting fit and ready to continue winning on the PGA Tour and fighting for the majors. He's a fantastic golfer. He deserves to be fit and healthy and challenging at the highest level. So wish you all the best, Justin, for a good, swift recovery. Okay, let's finish off with the LPGA Tour, and I'm certainly going to have to be looking at my laptop here because the name of this event is quite possibly the worst name of a tour event ever in the history of any tour events. So the LPGA Tour this week played the Annika driven by Gamebridge at Pelican. As we hit the penultimate event of the LPGA Tour season, you obviously have that area where you've got people fighting to retain their cards, but also you've got the big stars who are turning out to try and win these big events and give themselves the best chance of finding some form for the Tour Championship and the race to the CME Globe next week. Linn Grant from Sweden picked up the win, 3 shots clear of Jennifer Kupcho, and now at 26 years of age has 2 LPGA titles to her name. It's been a quiet year for Grant, including an alarming amount of missed cuts throughout the season that totals 8 of the 19 events she has played, with only 5 top 10s. For someone of her calibre and the last couple of seasons that she had, this is a real surprise. However, a big win at an event like the Annika will close out the season for her, hopefully set her up and get her mind in the right place, and allow her to winter well and come into the 26th season playing well, hopefully winning more and starting to challenge at the big events that she probably should be doing. To put her season in perspective, the win raised her 20 places on the race to the CME Globe, but only put her in 21st place. In the rest of the news from the event, Nelly Calder looked decent on the golf course this week and finished tied 15th on 9 under par. But the shock still remains that in 2025 she's without a win. And I reckon you could have got a really good bet at the bookies to say that Nelly Calder wasn't going to win an LPGA Tour event this season, especially after the season that she came off of last year. It's just absolutely crazy to think that we're at that point this season. With a decent finish this week though, hopefully that sets her up well for the final event, and obviously if she can go in, win the Tour Championship, win the CME Globe, then obviously that will be a good finish to her season and hopefully set her up to show us more of what she had shown us in 2024 in 2026. See, she's played 18 events and made 18 cuts. So, you know, it's not like it's been an absolutely disastrous season, but it's just that you expect Nelly Calder to be challenging week in, week out, and you expect her to be picking up at least a win, but probably more likely multiple wins in any tour season. With just 60 players heading to the Tour Championship this week at Tiburon Golf Club in Florida, a 6,590 yard par 72 track, that means that some big names have missed out on the season finale, and they include Lilia Vu, Rose Zhang, Georgia Hall and Yuka Sasso. We're talking big names that have just not had good seasons this year. So at the end of this week, all the major tours will have come to their climax. The PGA Tour Fall season ends and the LPGA Tour Championship takes place. However, that doesn't mean there's not going to be great content coming from the channel. We'll still be looking at everything that's happening in the world of professional golf, and we'll certainly be reviewing some of the biggest stories and biggest events of the year and looking back at some of the players that have made a big name for themselves this season. If you've enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so as next week you'll be able to catch up with all the latest from the final events of the men's and women's professional tour series. In the meantime, I'm Graham, and I'll catch you on the course soon.